Most people believe they're being good when they're being nice. They think it's a moral strength. But the truth is, for many, niceness isn't a sign of virtue. It's a nervous system strategy. It's a protective mask rooted in early survival programming. When you were younger, especially during critical developmental windows, your brain was constantly scanning the environment for signals of safety or danger. If asserting yourself led to punishment, disapproval, or emotional withdrawal from those around you, your nervous system adapted. You learned that being agreeable, quiet, compliant, being nice, kept you safe. This adaptation becomes ingrained in the autonomic nervous systems, particularly through the parasympathetic response known as the freeze or fawn state. Unlike fight or flight, fawning is the pattern of over-pleasing to reduce threat. It is subtle, deceptive, and is subtle and socially rewarded. But it's not authentic. It's fear disguised as politeness. It's anxiety in the body pretending to be compassion. And over time, it costs you. When you're constantly being nice to avoid conflict, you're actually betraying your own biology. You suppress emotional signals like anger, frustration, disagreement, not because they're wrong, but because you've been trained to believe they're unsafe. You disown parts of yourself. And each time you do that, your sense of identity becomes more fragmented. The real you, the one with opinions, needs, instincts, and direction begins to fade. In neuroscience terms, the amygdala, which detects threats, becomes hypersensitive to rejection. Even small cues, a facial expression, a delayed reply, a slight shift in tone, are misread as danger. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for conscious decision making and identity expression, is overridden. Instead of choosing from your values, you react from fear. You smile when you don't want to. You say yes when your body says no. You apologize for things that don't need apologizing. This is not self-regulation. It's self-abandonment. Niceness becomes your armor. You wear it to navigate social spaces, to fit into rooms that don't deserve you, to preserve peace at the cost of truth. But armor is heavy, and the longer you wear it, the more exhausted you become. Your nervous system begins to confuse people pleasing with safety, and your body pays the price. Chronic stress, hormones like cortisol and adrenaline rise subtly but persistently. Your posture collapses. Your breath shortens. You find yourself drained after conversations, even though nothing bad happened. This is the price of being nice without boundaries. This is the biology of a performance that no longer serves you. What many call being too nice is actually a trauma-informed behavior. It's not who you are. It's how your system learned to survive. And that distinction matters because when you realize niceness is a survival response, not a personality trait, you unlock the power to change it. You stop judging yourself for being soft and start understanding yourself as someone who adapted to chaos by becoming agreeable. That's not weakness. That's intelligence. but it's outdated intelligence. It was necessary once, but now it's costing you clarity, energy, authenticity, and growth. Your relationships suffer when you're too nice, not because people dislike you, but because they don't truly know you. You've trained them to interact with a version of you that isn't complete. You've overfunctioned in conversations, caretaken others' emotions, and lost track of your own. You've confused being liked with being loved. You've mistaken harmony for connection. The biology of niceness is efficient, but it is not fulfilling. It keeps you in loops of burnout and resentment. It keeps you invisible even when you're surrounded by people. And perhaps most dangerously, it keeps your nervous system addicted to external validation while starving for internal alignment. The brain is a pattern recognition machine. It learns by repetition, reinforcement, and reward. And whatever you practice, consciously or unconsciously, it wires into your neural circuitry. When you practice chronic niceness, saying yes when you mean no, holding back your truth to avoid disapproval, suppressing your feelings to maintain harmony, you're not just making social decisions. You are literally sculpting your brain to devalue your own identity. Over time, these repeated patterns become automated. Your brain learns that your emotions, needs, and instincts are not important. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for self-awareness, planning, and personal expression, starts to get overridden by the threat detection systems in the limbic brain. You stop living by choice and instead begin reacting from conditioned fear. You no longer ask, what do I really want? You ask, what will make them comfortable with me? The neural networks that support identity, confidence, and self-expression weaken from lack of use. Meanwhile, the circuits that manage social comparison, approval seeking, and people-pleasing grow stronger. This is Hebb's law in actions. Neurons that fire together wire together. If every day you fire the same response, being nice to avoid tension, playing small to be accepted, you are teaching your nervous system that who you are is a problem and who others want you to be is the solution. That becomes the template your brain runs on, even when the original threat is gone. The cost of this goes beyond the psychological. It affects your body and your biochemistry. When you suppress your truth, your body interprets that as self-betrayal. Cortisol, the stress hormone, increases subtly but chronically. Your vagus nerve, which helps regulate heart rate, breathing, and emotional equilibrium, begins to dysregulate. You might develop shallow breathing, tension in your jaw or shoulders, digestive issues, or chronic fatigue. All downstream effects of a brain that's been trained to mute itself for others' comfort. Emotional suppression isn't a passive act. It requires constant energy from the brain's executive centers to inhibit natural impulses. Every time you swallow frustration, fake a smile, or say, "It's fine," when it's not, your brain has to override your body's authentic signals. This burns mental bandwidth. It leads to brain fog, reduced cognitive flexibility, and slower reaction times. You might still appear functional on the outside, but internally you're running on overdrive, not from purpose, but from internal pressure to keep the peace. What's worse is that chronic niceness distorts your self-perception. You begin to believe you are only valuable when you're agreeable. You start to conflate your worth with how well you manage other people's emotions. This is the erosion of self. The inner voice that used to guide you gets quieter. And in its place, you develop a constant inner critic, one that punishes you for wanting more, needing space, or daring to say no. This critic isn't your enemy. It's a neural adaptation trying to protect you from rejection. But it becomes a prison when left unchallenged. People often wonder why they feel so exhausted after social interactions, even when nothing dramatic happens. The answer lies in how much internal effort is required to perform a version of yourself that is acceptable, rather than authentic. The smiling, the nodding, the over-agreeing, the constant second guessing, this is all mental labor. It's decision fatigue from managing perception instead of being present. And over time, your identity, the real you, gets buried under layers of adaptive behaviors. This is not just a mindset issue. It's a neurobiological loop. It's a brain trained by experience to prioritize belonging over authenticity. That wiring can be changed, but only through deliberate action. You don't snap out of people pleasing by thinking differently. You rewire it by behaving differently, even when it feels uncomfortable, because that discomfort is a signal that your brain is doing something unfamiliar, something that challenges the old safety pattern. And in that challenge, neuroplasticity is activated when you decide to show up as your real self, even in uncomfortable moments. You're not just making a personal or moral choice. You're making a neurological decision. You're choosing to activate the parts of the brain responsible for high-level processing, deliberate action, boundary, setting, and emotional regulation. At the center of that system is the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive command center. It's what allows you to be self-aware, to regulate your impulses, and to plan your behavior according to long-term goals instead of momentary emotional safety. The prefrontal cortex doesn't dominate when you're living in survival mode. When you're pleasing, shrinking, avoiding, or complying just to maintain approval. In those states, your brain's limbic system, particularly the amygdala and parts of the hypothalamus, hijacks the nervous system. You operate from reflex, not reflection, from habit, not alignment. This is why chronic niceness feels safe, but leaves you empty. It's a loop driven by a brain operating under the illusion of threat, even when no real danger is present. But the moment you decide to speak your truth, hold your boundary, or express an unpopular opinion, and you do it consciously, not reactively, something powerful happens in the brain. The prefrontal cortex lights up. It links up with other systems like the insula, which processes internal body signals, the anterior cingulate cortex, which manages error detection and emotional conflict, and the vagus nerve system, which manages physiological states. That one act of being authentic turns on an entire network responsible for making you more emotionally intelligent, socially grounded, and biologically regulated. That activation is not abstract. It has visible effects in your body. Your breathing slows. Your heart rate variability improves. Your pupils stabilize. Your voice becomes clearer. These aren't coincidences. When you act in alignment with your internal values, you regulate your nervous system from the top down. You stop outsourcing safety to external approval and begin generating it internally through congruence. You don't just feel more yourself. You become neurologically more stable. Authenticity also modulates your stress response in a completely different way than avoidance does. When you avoid speaking up, it may feel relieving in the moment, but it teaches your brain that your truth is unsafe. That association wires in deeper every time. The next time a similar situation arises, your stress response will trigger sooner because your brain has been conditioned to expect punishment for authenticity. But when you lean into discomfort and express the truth anyway, even if your voice shakes or your hands sweat, you start to break that association. You teach your brain, this discomfort won't kill me. And in that act, your stress threshold expands. Over time, the more you act in alignment with your real self, the more resilient you become. And here's where neuroplasticity plays its most important role. Repeated activation of these prefrontal circuits reshapes the brain's default settings. The more often you are authentic, the easier it becomes. The more often you say no, when you mean no, the faster those circuits fire. The more you prioritize your internal compass over external reaction, the more fluent your nervous system becomes at staying calm under pressure. You train yourself out of fear-based behaviors and into deliberate, conscious action. There's another layer to this. The autonomic nervous system, which includes your sympathetic and parasympathetic branches, begins to shift from reactive to responsive. When you're inauthentic, you tend to operate from sympathetic overdrive, shallow breathing, racing heart, heightened vigilance. But when you're aligned, your system integrates both arousal and calm. What's often referred to as a ventral vagal state. This is where presence, connection, and self-trust live. This is the physiology of someone who can walk into a room and hold their ground without aggression, who can set limits without fear, who can feel emotion without being hijacked by it. Authenticity is not a fixed trait. It's a trainable skill rooted in brain chemistry and nervous system regulation. You develop it not by overthinking or overanalyzing, but by choosing daily, moment by moment, to act from the internal rather than react to the external. Every single time you do this, even in micro decisions, You shift the architecture of your brain and the tone of your entire autonomic system. Identity is not a fixed personality trait you're born with. It is a living, adaptive system sculpted by experience, biology, and behavior. The truth is, who you are, who you become, is not something you simply discover. It's something you choose, reinforce, and train every single day. Being yourself is not just a philosophical idea. It is a neurobiological process that unfolds through repeated decisions, especially when those decisions go against the grain of comfort or social approval. It's easy to be agreeable, easy to conform, easy to follow the expectations that keep others pleased and your nervous system temporarily regulated. But being fully, unapologetically yourself, that takes neural work, physiological awareness, and intentional action under pressure. Every time you decide to show up as the real you, even in situations that feel emotionally risky, you trigger a cascade of neurological shifts. The limbic system, which governs your emotional processing and survival instincts, starts firing signals to protect you. Don't say that. Don't stand out. Don't upset them. Play it safe. That's your brain doing what it was built to do: conserve energy and avoid perceived social threats. But what you do next, whether you follow those signals or challenge them, determines how your brain will be wired tomorrow. Tears. Your nervous system is not fixed. It is constantly adapting to your behaviors. You are always training it, whether consciously or not. If you stay quiet when you want to speak, laugh when something's not funny, or say yes when you mean no, your nervous system registers those actions as confirmation that suppression equals safety. You reinforce the internal loop that says, being who I really am is too dangerous. But when you disrupt that loop, when you choose to say the thing, to express your truth, to protect your boundary, even when your heart races or your palms sweat, you begin to recondition your nervous system to associate authenticity with control instead of chaos. The process of reclaiming your identity from chronic niceness or fear-based behavior is not dramatic. It's not one huge moment of personal transformation. It's micro decisions repeated across time. It's pausing before reacting. It's choosing self-respect over ease. It's noticing the physiological tension that arises when you're about to be real and choosing to move through it rather than away from it. This act of choosing is where real neuroplasticity occurs. The brain doesn't change when you read or think differently. It changes when you behave differently under real emotional load. The prefrontal cortex, which governs conscious decision-making and identity-related processes, depends on input. If you feed it experiences where you act in alignment with your values, even when they're hard, you reinforce its dominance over more primitive emotional systems. The more often you do this, the faster those circuits fire. You begin to override impulsive reactions. You develop agency, and with each act of self-assertion, your baseline, nervous system regulation improves. This is where mental resilience is born, not from willpower alone, but from rewiring the brain's internal responses to perceived threats. This isn't just psychological theory. It's grounded in biology. The sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of your autonomic nervous system responsible for your fight or flight and rest and digest states begin to recalibrate through repeated authentic actions. When you operate from your truth, your system learns that tension does not always signal danger. It can also signal growth. You shift from operating in high alert mode to a more flexible adaptive baseline where you can respond without collapsing or overreacting. That physiological change translates into a stronger sense of self, clearer emotional boundaries, and deeper internal calm even during confrontation or disagreement. Being you requires a certain level of stress tolerance. It demands that you accept temporary discomfort in exchange for long-term clarity and self-respect. And the more you accept that deal, the more your brain shifts from threat avoidance to truth alignment. You become less reactive, more rooted. Your words carry weight not because they're loud, but because they're congruent. You stop chasing validation and start generating convictions. Each choice to be real, no matter how small, becomes a rep, like a mental muscle fiber being torn and rebuilt. It's repetition under resistance that builds strength. Not just in the gym, but in the brain, in the identity. In the nervous system itself, there's a common misunderstanding hardwired into many people's minds that if you stop being nice, you must become harsh, selfish, or cold. This binary thinking is not only psychologically limiting, it's biologically inaccurate. Your brain is not designed to reduce complex emotional expression into opposites. In fact, the nervous system thrives in integration, not polarization. So when we talk about shedding chronic niceness, we're not talking about becoming cruel. We're talking about becoming whole. We're talking about reclaiming the full bandwidth of human emotion, expression, and presence, and using it with intention, not avoidance. The nervous system can't lie. It speaks through posture, breath, tone, and tension. When you are being nice out of fear, that shows up. Your voice loses resonance. Your muscles tighten subtly. You smile without meaning it. Your body contracts while your words overextend. These are signs of a fractured inner state, where your biology wants to protect you, but your conditioning forces you to perform. And the more you repeat this disconnection, the more your brain normalizes it. You begin to equate self, silencing with morality, and authenticity with danger. But the human brain is built for nuance. It can hold kindness and boundaries simultaneously. It can speak truth without aggression. It can feel empathy without self-erasure. The prefrontal cortex, your executive center, is capable of regulating emotional responses and expressing them with measured strength. When you step out of automatic niceness and into conscious wholeness, that's the part of the brain you engage. You're no longer operating from an overreactive limbic system, which wants to keep you safe through avoidance, but from a regulated, integrated state that can hold both firmness and compassion. Wholeness isn't about winning arguments or dominating others. It's about emotional congruence. It's when your words, your breath, your body, and your values all move in the same directions. There's no leak in your energy, no distortion in your message, no second guessing in your stance. You don't need to inflate or deflate yourself to be seen. That level of congruence is a physiological state, not just a personality shift. It's a result of nervous system alignment, and it's trainable through consistent behavior. Every time you act in a way that honors your full emotional truth, not just the convenient or polite version, your body relaxes. Your heart rate variability increases. Your vagus nerve begins to signal safety from the inside out. That signal radiates outward. People begin to feel your presence differently, not because you're trying to impress them, but because your system is finally expressing itself without tension, without a mask. You are no longer splitting yourself to maintain an illusion of peace. The mistake people make is believing that boundaries and truth telling make them bad or unkind. But the reality is that suppressed emotions don't go away. They resurface later in resentment, burnout, or passive-aggressive behavior. That's not nice. That's mismanaged energy. Niceness that comes from fear creates emotional debt. You may look agreeable on the outside, but you're building pressure internally. Eventually, that pressure either erupts in ways that hurt others, or it turns inward and erodes your health, clarity, and sense of self. Being whole means you recognize and regulate this pattern. You don't need to swing from accommodation to confrontation. You learn how to occupy the middle, where assertiveness is grounded, not forced, where kindness is a choice, not a compulsion, where silence is mindful, not suppressed. This kind of presence creates trust because it signals truth. Your nervous system becomes coherent. Your communication becomes clean. You become the kind of person whose yes means something and whose no doesn't need explanation. Wholeness also expands your relational bandwidth. When you stop functioning to keep others comfortable, you give them the space to regulate themselves. You stop rescuing, fixing, or managing their emotions at the cost of your own. This is not cruelty. This is responsibility. You stop enabling dynamics where you shrink to be accepted. You start inviting others into a dynamic where honesty, clarity, and mutual respect are the foundation. You stop confusing love with caretaking. You stop mistaking peacekeeping for connection. You begin to live in a relational system that reflects your inner stability. Rather than your historical wounds